Live, Brenda.
All right, we're live. You can get going.
Okay. Good evening, Costa Mesa. Welcome to the City Council meeting for Tuesday, June 9th, 2020. This is a special meeting of the Costa Mesa City Council, and we'll call the meeting to order. Councilmember Reynolds is going to lead us in the pledge at this time. Council, can you please mute your phones?
Here's something else. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, at this time, Ms. Green, will you please do the roll by voice roll call?
Councilmember Chavez,
Here.
Councilmember Guinness,
Here.
Councilmember Mansour,
Here.
Councilmember Marr,
Here.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Here.
Let's see, hold on. Mayor Pro Tem Stevens. He's just getting in right now.
Okay.
And Mayor Foley.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem. Yes.
There we go.
Oh, I got to turn on the, okay, got it. I'm here.
Okay, we're already live. Okay, so we have two public hearing items tonight. Ms. Green, will you please read the titles?
Public hearing item 1, fiscal year 2020-21 proposed operating and capital improvement program budget. Presentation by Ms. Molina, acting finance director.
Ms. Molina, you're on mute.
Good evening, Mayor, honorable council members. It's my pleasure tonight to present to you the fiscal year 2021 budget. Let me go ahead and start sharing the screen. So tonight, we're going to be taking a couple of different looks at the proposed budget. We're going to go through the proposed budget highlights, review some of the revenue impacts that we're seeing, going through some of the expenditure reductions, including the reductions by department to get to a balanced budget. We'll finalize with the status of the general fund reserves and then go into the next steps for the budget calendar. So as you may remember, back in May 19th, not that long ago, we came to you with preliminary overview of what the 2021 budget was looking like at that time. We were looking at a preliminary revenue estimate of about $120.6 million against $150.4 million expenditure, looking at a shortfall of $29.8 million. At that moment, we were looking at some different categories of helping to balance the budget and came forward with some recommendations that were approved by the council, which include a combination of reserves, looking at other opportunities, some estimated staff furloughs, taking advantage of our CalPERS prepayment option, funding our IT replacement fund by 6 months, and continuing to wave the can to reduce our funding from the general fund for our capital projects for a balanced budget. Since then, we have been notified by the state not that long ago, just a couple weeks, short of a couple weeks, that the state approved the county to move into a stage 2, thereby allowing in-person dining, some destination retail with social distancing, manufacturing, and outdoor museums. A few days later, the state allowed the county to open additional businesses, including hair salons. And just earlier this week, late last week, the governor approved opening casinos, arcades, and fitness centers, which would be happening this week. As a result, we were able to come and take another look at our general fund revenues, knowing that some of these businesses will have a better impact into our sales tax. So we've increased our sales tax projections by about 4.3 million. We're assuming that we will resume our street sweeping and parking fines, thereby adjusting our revenues by $1 million, taking it back to our normal levels. Therefore, the original general fund revenue estimate increased from 120.6 to 126. We also took an additional step as it relates to our information technology. Due to some of the challenges we've been facing with our technology, we've rescinded our request to delay the 6 months and to start the implementation of our IT strategic plan starting July 1. Therefore, fully funding the 1.5% general fund contribution to our technology. So balancing the budget. This provides an overview of some of the revenue categories that we were able to analyze and bring forth some increases. We're increasing our sales tax by about 4.3 million. We've found some areas in government reimbursements by $500,000 that we're anticipating. Our street sweeping and some of our parks revenues looks like due to the reopening, we'll be able to increase those revenue estimates by $1 million. And we're also recommending the use of reserves for about 7.2 million for a total revenue of about 133.6 million. On the expense side, we came with a multi-pronged approach to take down the general fund expenses. Our departments have totaled reductions of about 10.8 million, and we're also estimating staff furloughs of 6 million to come to you with a balanced general fund budget. So what does this look like as it relates to 1920? In 1920, we had recurring revenues of $140.5 million. This will be taking down that recurring revenue by $14 million or 10%. We are not projecting any transfers in from our capital fund. It was a one-time in 1920. Therefore, that will completely be eliminated for 2021. And we are also recommending the use of our fund balance for a total change of revenue of $9 million and our expenses year over year reduced by $8.6 million, essentially a 6% change in both our revenue and our expenses year over year. For our revenue sources, our sales tax at this moment is at $55.4 million. It essentially concurs with HDL's estimates of where we would be. This assumes a slow reopening of Orange County from 70% in the first quarter and slowly going 75, 80 to 100% through till the end of the fiscal year. Our property tax, thankfully, is not anticipated to be impacted in this way. We are anticipating a 2% increase in our property tax due to assessed values already occurring. And as you can see, the other sales category, other revenue categories taking up a smaller portion of the pie. Some of our highlights for our revenues. Our revenue is decreasing 11% from the current year. Our property tax assumes a 2% increase. Our TOT, being realistic that conferences are still not being held. There's still a slowdown of leisure travel, even though we're starting to see a little bit of a pickup coming back. We're assuming a 50%. This is in line with Travel Costa Mesa. We've been in contact with them throughout this process and they concur. Our sales tax at 55.4 million, still a decrease of 4.5 million. Again, a slow rebound here, and it's consistent with HDL numbers as we start seeing some of our businesses open up and continue some of curbside and social distancing businesses. We are also anticipating reductions in some of our other revenue streams, a loss of about $6.9 million. What this means for us are a couple of different areas. It's right-sizing our marijuana tax. The current year budget assumes 1.2 million. Due to some changes earlier this year, we are adjusting that 1.2 million in the adopted 1920 budget to a little bit over $100,000 in 2021. Our building related permits are being reduced by roughly $900,000. Our investment earnings categories, this is where some of the prepayment savings was being captured in the past. We feel it's a better approach to take advantage of that prepayment savings in the retirement category on the expense side. As a result, that revenue category is taking a hit about $800,000. There's also some special event fees that are also being reduced to the tune of $500,000. And this is mostly related to the mass gatherings that are currently not open. And $1.6 million in rentals and fields, senior center rentals, so forth, those types of areas that in the past there would be mass gatherings. So for our expense side, our total general fund expense of $133.6 million is comprised mostly over 55% of our public safety department. So as you can see, 35% for police, 20% for fire and rescue. The other departments hold a significantly smaller amount of the pie. For example, IT is under 3% of the pie, finance barely 3%, parks at 5.5%, even development services is under 5%. It is hard to balance this budget without public safety, especially since they are such a large portion of the pie. So what did we take into account into our general fund revenues and expenses? There are no increases in our citywide headcount in the budget. It does include our pension cost increase of 2.8 million. This 2.8 million does take into account the expected prepayment savings of about $700,000. And we did fund the elections, which will be coming up in November. We're continuing the waiving of the can ordinance, retaining the maintenance of effort expenditures in the general fund to ensure that we continue receiving funds from our gas tax and other street grants that we receive that rely heavily on our MOE. The 2.2 million still maintains that requirement. We're fully funding the IT replacement fund by $1.8 million. We are utilizing our declared disaster reserves to help balance the budget. At the end of 1920, we're anticipating a strong financial reserves of 45.8, and I'll go through this a little bit later in the slides of how our reserves will be looking like in the next year and a half. There are no additional enhancements included in the budget at this time. So how are we balancing our 2021 budget? As stated earlier, on May 19th, we started with a preliminary deficit of about $29.8 million. At that time, we did inform you that departments were being asked to present 3 different scenarios, 5%, a 10%, a 15%, detailing what reductions they would give in each one of those scenarios. We also fully funded the IT strategic plan, and then we went ahead and took the approach of the multifaceted reductions of department reserves and staff furloughs to balance the budget. In this category, we'll start going into some of the department reductions. In the city manager's office, the contingency was reduced by about $360,000 of what's currently in the budget of $500,000. This would only leave slightly over $100,000 for any contingencies that may occur during 2021. The city attorney's department, as well as the city council, took their share of the 5% reduction. The city council's department, the placeholder of 5% or $39,000 was placed in professional development. For development services, this department took a variety of cuts to get to their budget reduction. Essentially, they are either deferring or transferring 8 positions. 3 full-time positions will be deferred of filling, and this may occur throughout the year. Some of these positions are partial year, some of these positions are the full year. The dollars will go through it in a little bit later, but this in essence gives 3 full-time positions that will be deferred. We're transferring 2 positions to an eligible CDBG fund, and we're reducing part-time staff hours for 4 positions, assistant planner, 2 code enforcement officers, and a plan checker. Development services is also reducing other operating expenditures such as overtime, consulting, and professional development. The total budget reduction is about $745,000. In the finance department, we're reducing some staff support for financial analysis. This would include some assistance the finance department normally obtains from private consultants to help with some auditing outside of our normal auditing procedures and requirements. Sometimes we ask for outside consultants to provide some more in-depth knowledge on different areas within finance since we're so lean. This would essentially reduce that capability. We're also implementing a vacancy savings of about $128,000 and some office supplies for about $220,000 in reductions in the finance department. For the information technology department, they're implementing a vacancy for a network administrator and also taking some haircuts around training, office supplies. They're deferring 3 different software programs until the following year that total about $92,000. Their total reductions for 2021 is about $260,000. For this particular department, in 1920 adopted budget, there was a vacancy savings factor of about $100,000, and we are retaining that vacancy factor into 2021. For parks and community services, we're reducing contract classes for about $103,000. This is in line with social distancing and avoiding large groups. There is a reduction on the revenue side as well. They're also recommending a reduction on on-call and routine animal contract services by about $130,000. Some other operating costs by $24,000 for a total reduction of about $480,000. This department as well had a 1920 vacancy cost of a little bit shy of $100,000 that will be rolled into 2021. In public services, they're including a vacancy factor of about essentially 4 full-time positions. 2 of the positions are being proposed to be vacant for only 6 months of the current year with the hope to be able to fill it halfway through. They've also taken additional steps to transfer eligible expenditures to other funds of about $600,000. They're reducing some of the services around the city, such as tree trimming and landscaping. They're decreasing repairs and maintenance for a total reduction of $1.7 million. In our fire and rescue department, we're defunding 4 vacant firefighter positions. However, that reduction is being offset by an increase in our ambulance medical supplies contract by about $130,000. Their total budget reductions is about $473,000. In this particular department, there is a placeholder for the value of sworn firefighter furloughs of $1.2 million. There is another caveat with this fire department. It does not address a structurally imbalanced overtime budget that this department has been experiencing over the years. In our police department, we're reducing overtime by about $81,000. We're also reducing some of our consulting costs, such as our helicopter services, by $153,000. Some other operating costs of about $25,000 with non-mandatory conferences, for a total reduction of about $315,000. The police department has a vacancy factor of about $3.7 million already built into 1920 that we're recommending to roll over into 2021. Similar to the fire department, the police department does have a placeholder for the 10% sworn officers for furloughs of $2 million. In non-departmental, we're reducing some of the homeless shelter operation costs by about $823,000. We were able to identify and obtain funding sources outside of the general fund to help offset some of those costs, such as CDBG, COVID-19, and Central SPA. There's also the eliminations of promotions budget, the reduction of the capital improvement project for a total budget reduction of about $2.3 million. In non-departmental, there is the placeholder for the 10% furlough for the miscellaneous non-safety citywide staff of about $2.9 million. In this year's budget, we're also recommending the transfer of our post-employment benefit program that's currently budgeted in the city manager's office to transfer into non-departmental since it is a citywide expense. This is an overview of the total reductions by department. As you can see, the $10.7 million is hit in almost every single department pretty significantly. It's really leaving these departments extremely lean. These are not easy cuts, and they were extremely difficult to go through. In these next two slides is an overview of the positions that are being defunded in 2021. This is very similar to the attachment that is in your agenda packet. The difference here is that in the agenda package, they were solely the 2021 increases year over year. In this particular table, we're including the parks part-time furloughs and layoffs that occurred earlier this year as a result of COVID-19. As you can tell in this next slide, there has been about a reduction of 110 positions, 114 of those being full-time and 96 being part-time. All of these would be defunded positions and would stay on the table of organization. For a historical note, we went back a few years so we could see what it used to look like before the recession hit. And we used to have a full-time staff of about 611 full-time staff members. We're down to 499. That's a reduction of 112 full-time members, in essence, an 18% reduction in workforce. For an all funds overview, our CIP totals about $13.9 million. Our internal service funds are fully funded with our equipment replacement of 2.6, essentially staying flat to 1920. Our self-insurance fund of 4.9 million as well, essentially is flat. Fully funding our IT replacement fund. We already have a commitment from the federal fund of CDBG of 1.4 million, home of 580,000. The only caveat with this presentation is the absence of the housing authority budget, and those will be coming forward to you on June 16th. For the total all funds budget for 2021, it's about a little shy of $161 million, 83% of which is attributed to the general fund. For our fund balance overview, in 18-19, we ended the fiscal year with about $53.3 million. In April, when we came before you to discuss some of the 19-20 impacts of COVID, we presented a second scenario, $18.5 million reduction. If that were to occur in 19-20 due to COVID and revenue loss, we would be dipping into our declared disasters committed fund balance by $7.5 million, which would mean that if that were to occur, our 19-20 estimate would leave $6.6 million in our declared disasters area. We are recommending for 2021 to utilize the full 6.6 that's available in declared disasters and take the balance from economic reserves for a total of $7.2 million. of our estimate fund balance reduction for 2021. In essence, this would reduce our general fund balance 28% from 53.3 million to a little bit under $39 million. So over these next 2 years, we've calculated what would be the total estimated impacts of COVID-19 on our economy. In 1920, under scenario 2, we were expecting about $18.5 million. In our 2021 proposed budget, our estimates at this time is a reduction of about $24.1 million that are currently being proposed before you. Our total estimates between 1920 and 2021 total about $42.6 million, with the largest share of the cuts coming from the departments, followed by the fund balance. So as a recap, I can't stress enough that these are all estimates. In essence, we have basically a month and a half of estimates to be working off of for 2021. Can't stress that enough. We are anticipating coming back to the City Council on a quarterly basis throughout the fiscal year as more information is provided and as they come through, as well as any potential new pieces of legislation that may help the budget. At this time, the 2021 proposed budget continues to fund public safety, comprised of over 55%. We're proposing to fully fund the IT replacement strategic plan. We're ensuring sufficient funding to maintain PCI, while at the same time using a multifaceted approach to balance the general fund budget through department reductions, the use of general reserves, and a temporary staff furlough. So for our next steps for 2021 proposed budget, as an overview, we did come before you on April 21st to discuss the 1920 budget impacts. On May 19th, we came again to start to discuss the preliminary estimates for 2021. On May 26th, Public Services provided a CIP overview at the study session. Before you tonight is the proposed budget public hearing. We are planning to come back next week on Tuesday, June 16th, and if needed, June 23rd for a budget adoption for a July 1st, 2020 fiscal year start date. At this time, I'd like to open it up for questions. The department directors are also available for any questions that you may have related to any of their specific reductions.
Okay, Council, it looks like Councilmember Mansour, then Councilmember Dennis. Councilmember Mansour?
Thank you. A couple questions, not in any particular order. Ms. Molina, you mentioned a city manager contingency fund, and I thought it was like in the neighborhood of 300 and something thousand. It's going to be reduced to 100,000. I thought historically that was more like 50,000. Did we up that, or what is that being used for? Or am I confusing that with another fund?
The city manager contingency amount was normally budgeted at $1 million. It was to be used for any unknown expenses or unanticipated expenses at time of budget adoption to help some departments with any costs that they may need. In 1920, that was reduced to 500,000. For the 2021 fiscal year, we're proposing to reduce yet again for just a little bit over 100,000.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. My bad. My recollection on the amounts was off, but you jogged my memory. So thank you for that. So we actually reduced it from what it was. Okay. You also mentioned fire overtime is a continual structural imbalance, and we're not addressing that. Did I understand that correctly? Can you give us
That is correct.
Okay, so what exactly does that mean? How much are we overspending, and what is it going to take to really fix that? And shouldn't we fix it?
Well, the fire department overtime has a structural deficit. From historical, it varies from $1.5 to $2 million a fiscal year. I do think it is one of those areas that should fix down the line. I think at this point, this budget is extremely tight. So yes, it's been a challenge for years. This is not a new challenge.
Right, and I understand that, but doesn't that mean we're overspending by $1 million? Does that put us in a hole to dip into reserves at the end? Let's say it's over a structural imbalance by $1 million. Does that mean we're going to go into reserves for $1 million at the end of the fiscal year?
Well, what we do during the year is we try to monitor it carefully. And this particular year, 1920, you may recall, and during the mid-year, we actually funded a little bit over $500,000 to help offset that. The fire department also had some vacancies that also helped offset some of those overtime expenses. And then, this is kind of one of those areas where as well, some areas which we may not spend as where we may anticipate. For example, we may not use the full contingency fund. This would be one area that would help offset that as well.
Okay. On the plus side, on the positive side, I just want to voice appreciation. I'm glad we're spending money on the IT fund. I know the finance department's computer system needs work, to say the least. So that 1.5 million, that is going to go towards that to fix that?
Correct. That is part of the IT plan, is to help with the finance system.
My screen did. We are going to address your software problem, correct? Or your
Yes.
computer crashes? Okay. All right. Very good. Just a couple quick questions. So this is we're proposing to exercise the emergency exception to the CAN ordinance. Can you tell me exactly what that means? Is that a per budget year decision that we make, that this time around, this budget, we are proposing to do that, but it's not automatic? It doesn't set a precedent. We would have to vote again next year or next budget if we wanted to do it again?
I can answer that, Madam Mayor. Yes, that is a decision that you make each year when you approve the budget.
Okay, very good. And when, I know this is a difficult time, so when would be our next, aside from tonight, obviously, when would be our next update, budget update or budget assessment where you have tangible information for us? I know it's going to, you're going to be monitoring step by step and month by month, but when would be our next proposed meeting and public update?
Well, we're planning to come back to the council next week for the 2021 budget. For the 1920 budget, we're expecting to come back in October once we have the first full quarter in and have a lot more information at that moment of how we're doing as the businesses start to reopen. Okay,
so October-ish. Okay,
right.
That I'll just say thank you, Carol, and thank you, Lorianne. I know it's been a ton of work, but I appreciate it. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Guinness and then Councilmember Reynolds. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Mar, then Reynolds.
Okay, first, I want to thank staff too. I know that this was a challenging budget, even without all the events by which we were overtaken here. And then to try to be putting together a budget basically while the ground is shifting beneath your feet with crummy software is just, I cannot compliment you enough. And one of the things that I really appreciated was the way the policies were outlined in the budget. That was very helpful. And let's see, I have a bunch of questions. We have an estimate. We have on page 15 of the budget, we have the reserves estimate that were audited at June 30th, 2019. At this point, I know it takes, the numbers are not in. Do we have any idea how we're tracking compared to last year? I know not as well, but do we have any estimate at all, or is it premature?
At this moment, it is premature. We still don't have a lot of data in. We won't have probably most of the data in until sometime September or October, as we will continue the monitoring the numbers on a monthly basis.
Okie dokie. And what percent vacancy factor was assumed for this budget?
So this budget was a little bit different than the 1920 budget. The 1920 budget did take a percentage on the vacancy rate factor. This year, we took a different approach with the departments. The department specifically identified positions that they would be held defunded for either the full year or for a partial year. And those were the positions that I outlined for you earlier in a couple of slides. Those would be included in that vacancy in 2021.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's see. And then I'm looking at our sales tax, and you had earlier said that our sales tax would be down, you're estimating about 7%, and I hope that's not overly optimistic. I don't know, I sure hope it's not more than that. But then on measure M2, fair share, that would be down about 15%. And I know that's based on sales tax, but when it's apportioned out to the cities, is it apportioned on a per capita or a different basis instead of on your sales?
That
That might be something for Raja.
might be something for Raja, yeah. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Ganes, the measure M2 fair share, there's a formula. It's OCTA has that based on the ordinance. So while it's based on sales tax, they also use they base it on different city populations and also individual cities' sales tax figures to come up with the value. So at this point, we are okay with keeping it the way it is right now because we also have some investment earnings that we could have factored in. So overall, we are comfortable with it.
So basically, it's a different formula, and that's why they're dropping by differing percentages.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Okay. And I noticed some of our programs in recreation seem to be going up. Well, I'll get to that part later. But on page 37, we have the various revenue into our different capital funds. And interestingly enough, we anticipate that park development fees would go down, but drainage fees would go up and trip fees would go down. And it seems like they would all track with development. So I would expect they'd all go down, but especially because it's an assessment fee. But why are the drainage assessment fees anticipated to go up about $350,000 then? Or can we get that later?
Yeah, Councilor, we can get that to you later, but that's also based on the information that we worked with development services, anticipating what projects are coming up that would trigger drainage fees, and then we use that to come up with that estimate.
So it's more project specific as opposed to across the board?
That's exactly right. Yes, it is based on individual projects. Yes.
Okay, let's see my tab for M2 again. Whoops. And on page 55, we have an increase in principal payments of about 500,000 over last year. And is that the amount that we're paying for refi and then also for the mobile command unit?
Yeah, that's the amount that we're expecting to pay for some of those high dollar amount, like the mobile command unit. We're not at that moment yet. We're not actually leasing, but we are expecting to finalize that lease in 2021.
Okay, because it went up significantly from 1.8 million to 2.4. So it seemed like there had to be something going on. And then on that same page, we're seeing a cut in what we call landscaping and sprinklers, but it's basically our landscape contract. Are we going to be cutting back on maintenance then?
So, Madam Mayor, Councilor Ganes, we are looking at both some reductions in service that we have identified some areas where we can reduce, But also we're looking at transferring money from some other restrictive funds to pay for some of the landscape maintenance. For example, if there is landscape maintenance along parkways and medians, that can be covered by gas tax too. So we are looking at using restrictive funds to fund a portion of the operating. That's the first time we are doing it, but at this time we feel that's appropriate.
Okay. Let's see. I have some questions about internal rent, but I'll just ask staff about that because it's kind of esoteric. And on page 78, we're anticipating a significant reduction in the documents that we will be converting into Laserfish. Is there a reason for that? Is it that we've already done a whole ton of them and there's not that much left? Or just that it's not a pressing need and it's a way to save money?
I'll leave that one for the city clerk, since that's a microfiche image converted it into the Laserfish system.
Yeah, there's two. There's one microfiche converted to Laserfish, and then there's the documents going to Laserfish.
Councilmember McGinnis, we'll get back to you on that.
Okay. And then whoops. Now we have salaries going up with the same head count in the city manager's office. Is that just people's step raises and so forth?
Yes. Those would be increases in merits and contractual obligations, nothing that's been above what's in the contract right now.
Okay, but we have probably newer people who are at the bottom step and would be moving up. Is that what accounts for that?
Well, keep in mind that when this budget was put together, the labor production side really starts early in the process. It starts around December, January, because there were positions that were filled at the higher level at that moment.
Okay, and then city attorney's office, considering, and I know this goes just for city attorney activity as opposed to litigation and so forth, but we're projecting a small drop in city attorney hours. And well, from $1 million to $950, it looks like. Is that realistic? I think you're there. And also, has that been negotiated with Jones Mayor?
I'm going to try really hard, Councilmember Dennis. You know, we've been trying to bring the bills down, and it's difficult. This has been a very, very busy year for the city attorney's office, as you know, and I'm very, very hopeful that a significant amount of the time that we've expended this so far or at the end of current fiscal year will hopefully be reimbursed by FEMA for emergency expenses, although they don't cover staff, management staff time. They do cover contractor time, and so I'm hopeful for that. That should be helpful. But I'll do my very best. Obviously, I can't predict what happens, and I do as much of this myself as I can to make it as efficient as possible. But I'm going to try and tighten my belt like everyone else is.
Yeah, because if things keep going the way they're going, you're going to be really busy for a while, probably.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, we got the $69,000 fee award. Maybe that's where you got the $50,000.
Yes. Okay. And then moving on to the finance department, where we have our goals. I know we were working on this, and then there were some changes over at the Orange County Fairgrounds, but 2021 goals, since there's not a lot of activity across the street from us right now, and there probably won't be for quite some time. But one of our goals had been to try to make sure that we're deriving the revenue that we should from that particular site, because our revenue has remained static as their activity and their budget has gone up and up and up and up and up, which might have indicated that we weren't really getting all the revenue we should have, although right now their budget's way down. But for the long term, for parks and community services, the little organizational chart shows the homeless outreach. And then we have the personnel who are homeless outreach workers listed, but I didn't really see it listed separately where we have all our different programs. And sometimes people are, myself included, want to know how much we're spending on homelessness efforts. In fact, we get that asked a lot, and I'm not seeing it actually broken out here. I see the outreach workers in the overall budget, but I believe they're under Parks and Community Services. So could we get that added to the different programs? In fact, we don't seem to have a budget number for that program. Maybe we do somewhere, but I think it would be helpful if we did. And I think it would be helpful for not only us, but for members of the public who want to know what we're spending there. And let's see.
Ms. Molina, can you address that? I asked about
Yes.
that today also. Can you address that?
Yes. The homeless shelter budget operations is actually budgeted into the housing authority section of the budget. And that's the budget that will be coming to you next Tuesday. So we're finalizing that resolution currently in that section of the budget from past, and when I saw last year as well, it was provided to the city council on a separately from the budget. So we're following the same methodology, and it'll be coming forth to you next week.
Okay, so the outreach workers are in that budget.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Because I had looked and I looked and I looked. Okay, and then going through on page 112 and 113, everything seemed to be more or less the same, no big jumps. However, we had a 40,000 increase in youth sports, a 60,000 increase at the, or 50,000 increase at the senior center, 60 at the day camp, 180,000 increase for rocks, 20,000 for teen programs. And I wonder, what are we anticipating? How are we generating all those increases? And what program increases are we anticipating? Because it seems an odd time to increase programming.
As you can tell from some of these areas, it's mostly attributed to salaries and benefits. So the bulk of that would be for the full-time salary and benefit categories. Yvette could answer more specifically, but these ones that you've actually identified are mostly salary and benefits increases.
Well, that's pretty huge, because then for youth sports, it'd be a 25% increase. For senior center, it would be a little over a 10% increase. For the day camp, it would be a 60% increase. For rocks, it would be about a 25% increase. And for the teen programs, it would be about a 15% increase. So we're anticipating that much increase in salary and benefits?
Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, that is mostly attributed to, like Ms. Molina said, to the part-time salary increases. While we only have about 76 FTEs in part-time salaries, just because there's turnover in the program, and sometimes we have to just share staff. We may use a few staff of higher classifications to provide some of that coverage. And so I think that was built into that a little bit. And then with the upcoming year and the reopening, we anticipate that we'll probably need more of the part-time staff just because of the social distancing guidelines and just the various guidelines that come with the reopening of some of those programs.
Well, I'm concerned because these are very significant increases from past years on some of these programs, and very significant percentage-wise increases. So I hope we can re-examine that. And then, yeah.
I was just going to add, in some instances, we also moved some of the part-time staff that had originally been appropriated into one account. And so they're just distributed differently.
Okay, let me look here. I'm trying to look. Well, we're showing actually salaries. We're showing not all that much different. Regular salaries, we're showing 1,239,000, 1,261,000. We are showing about 300,000 more in part-timers though than we had budgeted for last year. But that still doesn't quite cover all these differences. So could we look at that again? And then also in your presentation, you had indicated a cut in animal control. What would that entail?
For animal services?
Yeah.
So we had anticipated for the animal services contract, we were going to renew the contract, and we had anticipated that we would have to increase it just in conversations with our animal hospital. We had also seen an increase in the number of animals that were coming through the system. So that was just an anticipation of that. This year, we implemented a couple of different procedures for the way in which we accepted the animals, which has significantly lowered the number of animals that are coming through our system and being impounded. And we were also able to renegotiate the contract. So overall, the level of service will predominantly remain the same. But again, we were able to reduce that overall value.
Okay, and how are we changing how animals come into the system then?
It was mostly due to the kitten season and the way in which we were accepting the animals. So now, before residents were able to take kittens directly to the to the hospital, and so now what we do is we ask that whenever there's a call for service for a kitten or a cat, that the person remain in place until animal control is able to meet them to take the cat. And that has significantly reduced the number of calls that we get and the number of animals that come through the system, mostly in cats.
Okay. Which is a reminder for people, if you let your animals out, remember to get them altered. Okay. And then not too many more. Moving ahead to, I had a few pages missing, so I'll probably have some questions on those, but anyway, and then on consulting for Parks and Community Services, I had 2 pages. So is it the one that shows 867,000 or the one that shows 472,000?
The one that shows 472,000, that's just the general fund. The one that shows the 867,000 is all funds, since the Parks Department has multiple funds.
All righty. And then for PD, we're showing that we anticipate a significant drop in Part 1 crimes, well over 10% from 2017 to 2019. And I'm not sure if 2018 was the actual or the estimated. So did we actually really experience that kind of a drop? And if so, I'm really, really glad. But I'm just wondering if that's what really is happening.
Yes, so for on the part of the PD, our performance measures are based on actual numbers for that year, those years that you see. So those are our numbers for those years.
So we had a drop in Part 1, but an increase in Part 2. Is that just a change in what the criminals are doing or a change in how crimes got classified?
That's probably
in Sacramento.
Yeah, probably some of it is associated to the reclassification that has occurred over the years.
Okay, and our clearance rate seems to be going down. You look at, whether the robbery, the burglaries, the economic theft, identity theft. And I know this is not quite the forum, but I hope that you're working on a plan to get those up again.
Ma'am, council member there, continuously focusing on those that have the solvability factors that could meet. Each of our detectives are running over 100 and some cases at times.
Oh, man.
So they are actively pursuing these cases as they go through. It's a heavy workload, but they do excellent work on the ones that have the potential to investigate and follow up, and they focus on those.
Yeah, I know, because some of these it's just impossible to, it's very, very difficult. And then I have a question that actually applies to both PD and fire. We each year, actually PD seems to have gotten overtime under control somewhat, although every year we seem to adopt a lower amount than it actually ends up being. We're always very optimistic. But will a furlough just end up manifesting itself in higher overtime?
So on the part of the police department, I'll speak. Overtime is something that, over the last several years, we were using as we were trying. We had a vacancy factor in sworn and communication, so we had to use it overtime to meet those minimum staffing levels. As we continue to grow, we are putting some very strict measures in regards to overtime management. It has to meet MOU obligations, minimum staffing levels. Furlough, usually when we did a furlough last time, furlough was done based on staffing when there was available, or times when they were not needed. So last time when we had the 5%, they were given time off when it wasn't going to impact, or when it wasn't going to be a staffing issue. If there were patrol, for example, if we had 9 people and our minimum staffing 7, someone would be able to take their furlough. Others were taken off if they weren't part of minimum staffing, they used it.
Okay, and then of course that was all shot to smithereens by the last couple weeks, probably, right? With the overtime.
We have had a high operational and tactical tempo over last week. It's required required our personnel to hear and address the issues out there and facilitate those demonstrations, which all went peacefully. So we're thankful for that.
Yeah, I do want to compliment you on that. I watched the ones on the news. I went over to the one on 17th Street, which was amazing. Fully masked and all that. And I really want to compliment our officers on the job they did. They definitely were in de-escalation mode, we'll put it that way. And I think had it not been for COVID-19, some of the demonstrators would have been hugging our officers. So it was very positive. And that was what, 500-600 people? So
we had some huge.
Yeah, but excellent job. I was very, very impressed.
Thank you.
I digressed. Okay. The fire and rescue, I do have the same question about overtime. Once again, every year we say we're going to cut it and then it kind of creeps up again.
So Councilmember Guinness, that was a structural budgeting that Carol was speaking to. If we go back, and that's why I do want to commend Carol and Lorianne. Last year's budget lacked considerable transparency in terms of actually getting numbers, and you spoke to the 5-year trends. There were a lot of problems with it. And one of those was not actually defining overtime for police and fire, but we've done a great job this year in more definition. So with that, we look back 10 years for our overtime. Just about every year we were budgeted about $2 million. And I'll go back with you and walk you through. 11-12, our actuals were 3.2. 12-13, 3.7. And we come through 13-14, 3.6 million. 14-15, 3.9. And I just walk you through to get to the point we peaked out in 16-17, 4.2 million. That was a peak for us. And the goal has been to try to drive that down. And in a year like that, we do get reimbursements from OES. There was a year over 500,000. But I will say in 17-18 was the year we spun it around and we dropped it to 2.9 million. And I think that's lost because of the way it's structurally been put together. So we've continued to maintain right about $3 million. We're continuing to cut. We've implemented a number of pieces there. And this year we do have it in at 2 million, and that's the structural piece we'll fix. But we're taking that down from that 3 million actual down to a 2 million this year. So we've implemented a lot. And again, I commend Carol and Lorianne for addressing that. And we're trying to work through and get it to where it should be on an actual front. So a lot of time has gone into that. As far as the furloughs go, there are challenges relative to our shift schedule, but we've made some pretty dramatic contributions in terms of what we're doing, in terms of pulling off some positions for this next fiscal year, just for this fiscal year, and then we'll have to readdress it. But I think we've stepped in a large way to that end. And we'll be monitoring that. Our overtime as well, we're going to be pulling back where we can. It's a bit more challenging. And then the other piece I'd like to add for us is one thing we've done to balance out, if you will, our community risk reduction programs over the course of the past 3 years have come in, and cost recovery just a few years ago was about $150,000. Now it's over $500,000, and that's due to the planning. Our ambulance program, we've increased that this past year. 3.4 million was what we've brought in, which exceeded our expectation. And albeit with COVID and the economic pieces, we still anticipate that to grow. So while we do have some areas there that we're continuing to work on, I think we've come quite a ways. We've done a lot with overtime, and we've done more for the city in terms of the cost recovery in the past few years, I think, than anywhere else. It's certainly a big positive for the city.
Yeah, I think we are kind of chipping away at that, but it seems like every year we have a real hopeful approach, and then it doesn't quite work out. But like you said, you're chipping away. Okay, moving on to development services. Under the goals, this is just something that's not really a budget thing, although it is sort of. I would like to see added to the goals that we look at short-term rental ordinance. I know Councilmember Mara has mentioned that a couple times too. And we're getting a lot of emails on it. And I know that we don't exactly have a lot of spare personnel, but I think that's something I would like to see us work on. And then moving on to our workload indicators, we're showing a pretty significant drop in code enforcement cases from 1,800 to a little over to about 1,200. Is that because they're being handled through the housing authority, or is that just people aren't calling up, or I'm just interested to know why that's such a drop.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Guinness, essentially we're seeing some drops in complaints. It's actually a lot of this. It's not that it's being shifted to other areas. It's really just a matter of we're seeing a somewhat of a decrease in complaints over the last year or so.
So we've gotten less cranky?
Perhaps.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And let's see, public services. We're anticipating a significant drop in the number of facility rehabilitation projects for this year. And is that, say, like the type of thing where we're redoing a playground, just reflecting our kind of tightening the capital spending?
Yes, Councilmember Guinness, yeah, there is a reflection of the budget in some ways. We are more on a maintenance mode for the upcoming fiscal year. So not changing things, but trying to maintain as much as we can.
Okay. I think that's most of my questions. I had one about something, why it was classed a certain way, but I could ask that offline. It's very technical.
All righty. I've now forgotten who was up next. I apologize. I believe it was Councilmember Marr, and then Reynolds, then Stevens, then Chavez.
Okie dokie. So let's actually go back to fire, and maybe this is just me not understanding So it looks like we're still planning to buy a new truck and a new engine. Where would I find those expenses in the budget?
So that would be the $500,000 increase in the principal payment since we're planning on going out for a lease. It would be the loan payment amount. So we would not be actually purchasing the entire amount. We would be leasing it.
Okay, so that's over. And where would I see that, Carol?
That would be on page 206 if you're looking at the budget document under non-departmental.
Okay.
You'll see the increase there.
I think that's what the thing that we'll see how many budget cycles it takes for me to figure out to look in non-departmental when I'm looking for something. So similarly with the litigation costs, that was one that came up. So we had a $1.5 million budget for litigation costs. I'd like to think we're past some of the Yellowstone case and some of these other big expensive things. I guess that, we may sue the federal government at any time, but generally speaking, do we still feel like 1.5 million is an appropriate amount for litigation expenses outside of your bucket, city attorney? Of course you're going to say yes, but I've always struggled with this litigation cost.
We certainly hope so. We are seeing a slight decrease overall as the cases begin to process through the trial court and go to the appellate court. The decrease is primarily due to slowdown more than anything else. But I am seeing as we succeed in cases, as we received a favorable ruling today in the SoCal recovery case from the Ninth Circuit, I am seeing a slight reduction in those. Litigation is very difficult to predict, and it's much more difficult when certain kinds of things happen because we're looking at people suing us for the most part. That's where those cases and costs come from. So it's very difficult to predict it and control it, but we're really doing our best, and I hope that number will suffice. We are probably going to be just at budget for this current fiscal year or slightly above, but I do expect that we could probably meet the 1.5 million for next year.
I mean, in fairness, I feel like we had a lot going on this year as it related to legal expenses and to your time, frankly, if we're adding the two together. So I'm sure Councilmember Gannis will tell me I'm being too optimistic, but I would like to think that next year we can hopefully significantly reduce legal costs, given that they're all on a time and materials basis.
I certainly hope so.
The only problem is that, like she was saying, we had a slowdown because the courts were closed.
I understand that.
Yeah. So then so we still are in litigation on 7 cases. I don't see it.
They've moved through the process, right? We've got more that are the Ninth Circuit as opposed to starting off the legal battle.
Well, I know, but that's more expensive. The appellate work is actually more expensive. So I don't see it reducing, frankly. I don't really see that.
No,
but I hope you're right.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, the good thing about when the cases are in the appellate process are you don't have the day-to-day costs of discovery and so on. And while the fees can be significant to do the briefing and so on, because of the time it takes to get through the Court of Appeal, those fees can be spread out a little bit more. We have had multiple requests for extensions of briefing time. Some of it's COVID-19 related in the current cases, but it's not unusual in the appellate process for that to happen. So it's a greater cost, but it's spread out over a longer period of time. Let's put it that way.
I'll feel marginally better. Okay. Sorry, Chief Stefano, if I could bring you back. Can you explain what accounts for the change in the ambulance program over time? So it was like 3 million or so last year and then 3.4, and we're expecting it to get to 3.5. Like, what are we actually doing any differently that would result in that increase?
So I think initially we were trying to project when we first brought the program in, and we did all the work on the front end until it actually played itself out. We weren't really sure what was going to land. We thought 3 million was about it, but there are a number of things that are happening in terms of we're doing quality assurance. So the way we go through the mechanism of going through reports, and then when the reports are billed out, when we get that information back, we're working with the billing company. Just as an example, over the course of the past 2 months, we found over the last quarter about $100,000 that would have just gone away just due to the process of billing. That's one mechanism, and that's just because it's infancy for us in terms of this is just a few years old, and it's consistent with what we've heard from the other programs that are out there. It takes about 3 to 5 years until you actually hit that stream of where you've got all the bugs worked out, so to speak. So I think that's really what it is. Our projections were conservative in terms of what we had. We didn't want to overpromise and underdeliver, and I think we were right at where our consultants said we were going to be. But I think that's what it is. It's fine tuning, and then some of the reimbursements that we're able to get back at the state level. Some of the other areas when we're fine tuning, and legislation's changing as well that we'll see probably in the next year or so. So I think a combination of those different things. We're just getting better at the administrative side of things.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I was surprised to see that continue to go up. So that makes sense.
We're happy with that.
Can you, Ms. Molina, I think you were driving the slides, go back to it was attachment 4 in our staff report. It was the list of department by department what the cuts are. Yeah. Go back one slide, please.
This one.
No, I was looking for PD. So at least in our staff report, I was trying to understand. Oh, you know, it wasn't PD. It was in development services. There was like consultant reductions multiple times. And maybe it's not in the version that you have on the screen, but we had reduced consulting services for $84,000, reduced consulting community improvement for $65,000. I mean, I guess I could look at my budget book too, but this was sort of listed as though it was 1, 2, 3, 4 different large consulting reductions. I don't know if Mr. Curtis here. Oh, there you go. Thank you. That's a lot. Are those 4 different initiatives or efforts?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Marr, really, it's a combination of consulting funds from the various divisions in our department. So you're correct, it was listed for some reason. It sort of doesn't matter, but it was listed 2 different amounts for community improvement, code enforcement. At the end of the day, those were the original funds. It just was for some reason broken up in 2. But this overall decrease is a result of some decreases in planning, consulting, some in building consulting, and some in community improvement division funding.
So we're about to embark on our housing element process. I think you've heard from a lot of us, and I know as much as we are trying to be mindful of reduced staffing, this is also the opportunity that a lot of us are kind of thinking this is, there are other things to be done. We talked about a committee recently for economic development. I mean, are we cutting back so far at this point that your sense is we will do what we need to do to get a certified housing element, but we probably don't have the budget in there for much more?
Councilmember, obviously across the board for every department, I think the budget's very tight. But no, I don't think that's the case, particularly with the housing element. What doesn't show up here is additional funding we have coming from SB2 grants, and we'll be putting in for another LEAP grant that will be coming to the council, I think, at your next meeting. Those don't show up here yet because we don't have the funding. Once those are finalized, a budget adjustment would occur with that would allow additional money. If you recall, the SB2 funds, a lot of those funds were allocated towards the housing element update. So particularly along that line, I do not have that concern. This will certainly impact us to some degree in our ability to do extra things that we would like to do, but I'm not concerned it's going to affect our ability to do a robust housing element update.
Okay, thank you. Last question, and then I'll pass the baton here. So originally we had removed the 5-year IT plan. We brought it back. I'd kind of like to take a second look at it, to be honest. I think there were a few things in there that I've had some follow-on conversations with some folks, and I'm not sure. I recognize the reason we want to bring it back is because we've experienced a lot of challenges, particularly with putting the budget together, and we should focus on that in particular. We had, I'm thinking about the VoIP telephones, right? That I don't know that in my mind is like an urgent priority. So when we're bringing the whole IT strategic plan back, I don't know that everything in there still makes as much sense. So, it just seems like, we're cutting $250,000 out of consulting services for development services. We're nickel and diming sort of every department in every possible way. I don't want to just sort of give a blanket approval for the IT strategic plan when potentially there's things in there that are not the highest priority. But maybe that's just me. That's it. Thank you.
Well,
Councilmember Reynolds. Councilmember Reynolds.
It is not just you, Councilmember Marr. I think that last comment makes a lot of sense, and everyone before it, of course. So I was hoping that everyone before would cover all my comments, but we didn't. So I'll try to march through these quickly. One of the first things that jumped out at me was the expected additional revenue from street sweeping tickets. And I understand that's sort of standard practice, something we see often. But I am curious, I'm just concerned about us. I know we're looking at revenue everywhere we can get it, and finding $1 million of it on tickets, possibly on the backs of our residents, just makes me a little bit uneasy. So I'm curious. I'd like to just see the data. I think I know the police have a pretty good system to be able to download that. I'd like to just see the data about where those tickets occur, just to get a sense of where that those dollars would be coming from in a typical year. We have a lot more people at home still, so I just want to get a sense ahead of time of what that would mean for our residents. Okay, flipping through pages here. So in the city council budgets, we have, I'm looking at page 69 of the budget. We've got, I see a reduction, but still almost $80,000 for meetings and conferences and professional development. I wonder if that might be, we've talked about nickel and diming. I would like to see, what, if we could cut some there, maybe what we've used that for maybe in the past year. Do we really need that much this year? Considering sort of slowdowns everywhere. Next department. Sorry about this, I have a lot of sticky notes. So this will be a broader theme. You'll hear me comment on this across a lot of departments, just looking at the goals. And I completely understand that, well, I guess two broad comments. So we have at the end or beginning of each department section, a list of goals for the year. And in some cases, some metrics that we track. And we talked about this last year, even in what we would call sort of a normal year, having almost too many goals. I'm looking at this at the lens too of aligning those goals with our council priorities, and this very important conversation that has come up with the events of the last few weeks. And so I'd like to see, one thing I just saw missing that is tied to our council goals, our council priorities, is just engagement. So for example, in the city manager's office fiscal year 2021 goals. I didn't see sort of engagement there. There's notification of residents. There's getting information to residents, but really the intent. I had proposed this goal when we did our meeting over a year ago, and the intent with engagement was really about getting new people coming to council meetings. Maybe we need to make them a little bit more exciting, but really participating, actively engaging, not just receiving information from us. So I know it's a tough year in general, but I'd like us to be thinking about that a little bit more in our goals. On the metric side of that, for example, we do say one of our goals, and I was really happy to see this, is working on a citywide volunteer program. I think that's going to be really valuable. I think a lot of people in our community are really interested in that. I'd like to see a specific goal around that. What is the number of volunteers that we want to try to engage? Right now, a lot of our metrics are about paper mailers going into homes and stuff. So over time, this is not something that I expect you guys to do or in the next couple of weeks, but just starting to be thinking about that. The other broad theme that I've been thinking about a lot in the last couple of weeks is this equity question. And I'd like to see that start to get woven into some of our goals. I think we've talked about different areas in particular at a high level. Park access comes up a lot, access to open space in different parts of the community. So really starting to think about what metrics are tied to our priorities and related to sort of the equitable use of our city resources across our city and for our residents. Yeah, okay. In the Parks and Community Services section, same thing. In Parks and Community Services, we don't mention engagement at all in the goals. So I know that's certainly not because we don't engage, but I'd like to see that sort of explicitly written in. Equity and engagement, again, in our community services. I think it would be really valuable to have some very specific metrics around those topics. This year, especially, I think there's still, despite the budget challenges, I think a lot of real good opportunity and really important opportunity to work on community building and engagement. We've got some, we will have some more open space opening up over the course of the year with new parks and new community centers. So seeing in our budget, written in our budget, some metrics and specific goals around engagement and equity, I think would be really, really valuable and aligned with
Councilmember Reynolds, I'm confused because in both the instances, it says in my book, so at page 108, there is the column community engagement.
Yep.
Now, I put some check marks in different boxes because I thought that they were lacking, but there is the column community engagement. Are you talking about something else?
And there's one check mark under community engagement.
Well, right, but I think that there's check marks that should be in other places. So are you suggesting that you think that any of these other goals and objectives should have the check mark? Because it's hard I think staff would have a difficult time knowing what one you would want to check the box in. I know what I'd want, but I don't know what you would want.
So, Lorianne, you and I have had some conversations about this. I think some broader metrics. I think you had some experience in sort of equity metrics.
Right, I'm not talking about that. That's a different topic. I'm just trying to understand so that I can understand what you are expecting for staff to come back with, because I think we all would want to understand so that we're clear. As to community engagement, as an example, item number 2, begin the implementation of the Parks, Recreation, Open Space Master Plan. I would check the box, active transportation solutions, as well as community engagement for that goal and objective. To me, you would have to do all those things to implement the master plan. So it's not checked in here, but that's all I'm asking is which boxes would want to check? Because I know which ones I'd add.
Sure, we can add check marks to the boxes. What I'm looking for is a specific goal related to meaningful community engagement. And I can talk to the city manager. We've had some conversations about this, about what that would look like in terms of some specific goals. I think what we've seen to date, again, is a huge improvement, right, in how we're notifying people about about what's going on in the city. I think there's a next step beyond that, which is really connecting them to, measuring like who's showing up, how many new people are we getting coming to events, how many new people are we getting engaged in various programs around the city. We've seen improvement. I didn't see it written as a specific goal. So I mentioned before, it was a broader theme that I want us to be thinking about.
I'm still confused. Okay.
One example on the related to our open space master plan that I think would be a valuable metric to have in terms of parks and community services, maybe this is public services, for example, is acres of open space accessible to the public. That's a theme that those of us on the park committee have been talking about quite a bit. We know that we have a sort of a shortage in terms of the standard metrics on acres of park space per person in our city, and there's certainly some disparities across the city. So I'd love to see us find creative ways, and we do have some creative ways already built into our CIP, but a metric like that to really demonstrate to the public that increasing the access to open space is a measurable goal that we have in the city. I think Councilmember Guinness got all my questions about the parks budget. So I saw all those increases and was a little bit confused about that too. So thank you for running through those questions. Okay, so police department. So continuing the same theme, and directly related to a lot of the conversation we're hearing now, we are very proud of our sort of community-oriented policing approach. And we talked in our last meeting about a lot of the benefits that have come out of that, and a lot of progress over sort of our lifetimes in the city. So I was surprised that none of that was actually written in the goals. So here's a place where I think we can and should be much more explicit. If we're on page 137, we've got a short list of goals for the police department. And I think we should be very, very front and center about our community-oriented values here. So those could be goals. We've talked about the bias training. We've talked about, again, community engagement. Maybe there's a goal around increasing participation in neighborhood watch groups, increasing engagement in I think we have the Citizen Academy training, metric around coffee with a cop or other public engagement events. I felt like that was missing here and doesn't reflect the good work that the department does. I think we heard in our comments last meeting that we all believe pretty strongly in the value of those. So I think it'd be good to see those goals here in this budget document. Yeah. Okay. In public services, something that I think I bring up every time, I would love to see it as a specific goal, and that's implementing a sort of publicly accessible status tracker on our CIP projects. I think we did confirm last meeting that Mr. Setharaman had a good plan for that, but it'd be great to see that as again, a measurable goal to implement this year. Mr. Setharaman, is my understanding correct that you do plan to implement some sort of method? I think you said it was different than what I was using as an example.
Yes, Councilmember Reynolds. We are looking at having something on our website that would actually list all the CIP projects, and you can click on it and get updates on that on any specific project.
Yeah.
And we'll try to keep up on updating. It's the difficulty is finding a staff member who is dedicated to doing that and keeping up with the process. We'll do our best to do that.
Yeah, and even like a monthly or even quarterly update. I get a lot of questions about that. I think others do too, and those turn into emails to you. So hopefully that actually saves some time on your end as well in having to answer questions.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it? Did you have other questions?
No, I'm turning the pages here. Okay, so Mr. Setharaman, this is for you, I think, on page 230. So this is in the CIP section. This is on the building modification projects. So this has $6,000 for relocating the wrought iron fence in that small park area by the downtown recreation center. And I was just a little bit curious about that because we've had a number of conversations about actually making that space more accessible to our public. I think that was part of a discussion in the broader Lions Park sort of reopenings, and it's something our Parks Committee has talked about quite a bit. What I would like to do, because I know the Parks Commission has been talking about some strategies for like low cost amenity upgrades at different parks. We had, in the good old days with this council, right? Do you remember the pickleball group that came in and talked about the value of pickleball? I know there was an idea about putting up some pickleball courts. I think it was at Tanninger Park. There's a frisbee golf push to get some of those frisbee golf, whatever you call them, stands around some. So these are like really low cost park upgrades that I think would be very valuable as more people are sort of staying home and looking to recreate sort of locally in their neighborhood. So I'm just wondering if like how important is it to do this fence relocation, and could we possibly reallocate those funds towards some of these low cost park upgrades?
So Councilmember Reynolds, that relocation of this wrought iron fence is actually between the DRC and the library, the Donald Duncan Library. So we have a little dead space in that area, and it attracts transients. Sometimes it also has a lot of trash issues. So it's basically trying to address those issues, and it's specific to that particular location. It's not the bigger wrought iron fence that you see around.
Okay. Did the CIP have any budget for some of those low cost park upgrade projects that the Parks Commission had been talking about?
Councilman Reynolds, unfortunately, this year we don't have much of room in adding projects like that. As this year goes by, maybe during the mid-year we can look into options, but at this time we don't have any funding for that.
Okay. And do we still have a 24/7 security guard at that park?
I would let Aguilar answer that. Yes.
Yes, Councilmember Reynolds, at this point in time, we do.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So we do, yeah, I don't know. I'd like to maybe nudge for that a little bit. I'm curious if others will support just this sort of reorientation of these, some small dollars to try to create more amenities and maybe hold off on some of the, I don't know, fencing that sort of separates people from our parks. Okay, a few more. On page 240, this is the new sidewalk missing link program. I was curious, the picture on the bottom shows Charlie and Bernard Street. Is that one of the planned locations, or is that a stock photo?
No, that's correct. That's
Okay.
one of the planned locations.
I was hoping so, but right above it, it said citywide, so I wanted to make sure. Thank you. Page 246, the West Side storm drain improvements. So this is my understanding, $500,000 towards a design project with an expected, was it $7.8 million of construction. I think this is one we had started to connect on probably over a year ago. My understanding is that the expectation is that that is just sort of building out bigger pipes to get water moving through, or I guess underground more quickly. Is this the project then that intersects with Newport Beach's drainage pipes? That was also a bottleneck.
So, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Reynolds, this is actually not specifically to any one particular project. So we are earmarking this money for the future project. We are, over the years, we will be accumulating some money into this particular project. Mm-hmm. Simultaneously, in the next fiscal year, we're initiating a drainage master plan. That plan would come out with a list of projects, and we'll be going after grant funding. We'll be going after future revenues to implement many projects, and some of them include what you just mentioned, building bigger pipes underneath to store the water while waiting for downstream water to dissipate, and then we can release this water. So those are some of the ideas that come as part of that project. Again, this is basically some seed money, and we're building up enough money to do a full design of it.
Okay. Will you be considering, one of the reasons I was really excited, Salem came down on our sustainability manager role, was looking at opportunities for like swales as part of water capture. Is that something that would be considered in these designs?
Yes, Councilmember Reynolds, that's something that we are encouraging everywhere. So, even in our landscaping projects, we are trying to capture as much as possible. And when any future development comes in, we are encouraging them to do swales or do retention basins on site to retain as much water. So that's part of our program.
Okay, great. And then the last CIP question was on 259. I mentioned this on the in our CIP review. I think the last sort of budget discussion, the Wallis 19th Street crosswalk. So this was a 30,000 for design and expected 300,000 for implementation. And I just wanted to make sure that we sort of keep an open mind about different traffic calming measures there. We're going to have the pedestrian master plan, right? Look at this area because 19th Street is one of our pedestrian corridors. And I just want to make sure I absolutely want to address sort of safety getting across the street here, but make sure we keep an open mind about different design opportunities for that, especially if they may be less expensive.
Yes, Councilmember Reynolds, we will. And we are also going after, there is an ATP grant that's out in July 15th, and that's one of the projects we're applying for.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, so sort of broader themes, I mentioned the sort of performance metrics. What are we as a council, we talked about this a little bit when we were discussing the RENA numbers, right? What's really important to see in our city? And I just want to sort of elevate again the discussions around engagement and equity. We talk about safety. We don't have metrics though around like vehicle collisions or pedestrian collisions, and it'd be nice to see some specific goals around reducing those, maybe for future years. I know this is a very constrained year. For the city manager, it would be really helpful. Again, our list of priorities is no shorter than it was last year. And every department has a really long list of goals. And I think we all will admit that we're a like eager and ambitious council. So I think it would be really helpful at some point early in the fiscal year to just talk through, I would appreciate an understanding of your strategy on addressing those goals this year, given the budget constraints, given staffing constraints, given other sort of mandated requirements. I think that would help me during the year sort of manage my expectations too. That may come with a communication strategy too to help your sanity and your team kind of march through implementing everything here. So I would appreciate that. Yes, and then back to, sorry, one other item, and I had wanted to chat with you about this beforehand, so I'll throw it out there, and I'm curious what you think. Again, around the discussion of sort of equitable services, engagement across our community, looking at different metrics around our community health and our community safety. I've been thinking a lot about how we address this in Costa Mesa. There are tons of good things in Costa Mesa. I think we're all proud of what we stand for and in our brand. I do, though, hear stories of people who are struggling with various aspects. I do feel like there are disparities in the use, in the awareness, the use, the access to services. We know that there are folks in our community who feel unwelcome, and I'd like to find ways to address that. And if there's a way, I think there are a number of different ideas floating around. If there's a way, whether it's within staff or a consultant, to do sort of an equity review across our different services, and give us a report and some recommendations on that, I'd really appreciate a way to do that. I know we're super constrained, but I'd love to hear your ideas on that now or later. And that's it. Thank you.
Ms. Farrell Harrison, did you want to respond now, or you want to wait until at the end? It's up to you. I don't have a preference.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. I can respond now. I think as we enter right now, as we go through the budget process, for sure we'll be adding some of the suggestions that you have related to engagement. I think central to engagement is that conversation about access and awareness of all city programs and services. And so what I would encourage is that as we, once we've adopted the budget and as we go into the next fiscal year, we do have our strategic planning retreat. I think that's one of the things that we had planned on doing. Unfortunately, it was scheduled for the 30th of March and we were in lockdown mode. And I think that's the perfect time for us to talk about framing that. What are the areas that we want to look at, and how we go about doing that. And I think at that strategic planning retreat, when we talk about all of our goals and all of the new initiatives that we want to undertake, given the constraints and resources, how do we engage in that equity conversation, and what neighborhood groups and just how we go about doing that. And so I think that would be appropriate for when we get together with our retreat that unfortunately had to get postponed.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, it looks like I have Mayor Pro Tem Stevens and then Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you. I could use my little fan, Councilmember Chavez. It's so hot here in my room, and I have to have this bloody light on the whole time. Hey, so I've got 6 things, and it's a combination of questions and comments. The first is a question. Oh, let me before I start, hold on, let me say this. Thank you to Carol. Carol, that was about as clean of a staff report as I've seen from anybody. No offense to everybody else that's given me a staff report. And under the circumstances, it was outstanding. Even I understood it, and this is not my strong area. So I really appreciate the work that you've done. And for Lorianne, of course, this is one of the reasons we hired you, is because you're so strong in finance, and we couldn't have a better person at the helm right now. And for all of the directors who are out there and they're not on screen, thank you for the sacrifices you made, and thank you for the sacrifices of the people within your department. I know it wasn't easy, but as Carol did when she went through departmentally, all of those cuts represent a lot of thought and a lot of sacrifice on your behalf. So thank you very much. I do have a question though for you, Carol. So I understand this point. So we're on page 7 of the actual staff report, and the statement says, you probably had this all committed to memory. So the statement basically says we're at 499, and you referred to this when you did the graph that showed where we were, and it went down, and we're now at 499. And that, but I know that particularly in the Parks Department, we've had the substantial amount of layoffs. I think it was 54 layoffs. We've had then furloughs. I think it adds up to 92 furloughs, and I know they were part-time, but they add up to FTEs. And then there was a reference right in that same section, I believe the next sentence, to, I think, 13 and 5. It added up to about 18.2, something like that. So how do you reconcile the statement that we are at 499 just like we were last year, when there's all this movement that we've heard about both in this staff report and in previous staff reports in terms of heads being reduced or budgets for heads being cut?
So let me explain. The table of organization of 499 is essentially maintaining all of the positions. What it is doing, though, it doesn't reflect the positions that are being defunded. So in some of those reductions that I outlined by department, what we're recommending is to keep those positions within each of those departments. We're simply defunding them. So it provides an opportunity as revenues come back, as we start seeing the funding come back, to help us fund those positions again. So in essence, it's not reducing our head count. It's just defunding it until we get to a better position fiscally to be able to fund them again. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, but a quick follow-up question. Is there a place in the budget where I could find the number of the funded FTEs? And if not, can we get that at a subsequent meeting?
We could. I just wanted to caveat that some of the departments in 1920 adopted budget had a vacancy attrition factor, and that was a percentage based. It was not calculated by actual positions, which is what we are recommending to do in 2021, where we're actually identifying positions that are being defunded to help balance the budget. In the case for the police department, for example, they have about a $3.7 million vacancy attrition. And most of that has been able to be filled because police officers or other positions in the police department, they retire, they separate, yet the onboarding process to bring in a new officer is extremely time consuming because of the police academy and all so forth. So that allows for some vacancy savings without actually defunding any positions. So the caveat would be how to identify those vacancy attrition factors that were incorporated into 1920 adopted budget that were not using actual positions. I can give you the defunded positions that are included in the 2021 budget, which you saw in those two slides, and then they're also included in the attachment for your agenda report. That would be taking down the funded positions.
Thank you. Okay, that's my first thing. Now I'm moving on to number 2. Carol, I think you're probably still on, but maybe we'll talk to Yvette on this. The golf course. There's a projected 20% reduction in our revenue from the golf course, from 2.3 to 1.84. I happen to know that we have increased the fees at the golf course. I also am not ashamed to admit that I spend a good deal of time at the golf course. And from my personal observation, I don't believe we've had 20% less. We are having 20% less play now. Even if we're having less play, some of it should have been compensated by the increased fees. We obviously don't have the cafe going or the banquet facilities, but those should be going online pretty soon and probably before our fiscal year. So how do we, justify that a 20% reduction in golf course revenue when it doesn't appear like there's been a 20% reduction in play?
Keep in mind that we don't have that kind of revenue data At this point, we did have a point in time where the golf course was closed, and now the activities of a golf course do require social distancing efforts. And as an additional conservative effort, we wanted to reduce some of those revenues until we actually could see them coming back to light. This is one of the revenues I have clearly, just on my own, identified as one to keep a close eye on as we start getting more and more data on how the reopening of the golf course, how the social distancing is impacting the revenues. We don't have enough data at this time to be able to fully commit to what we normally would get in the golf course revenues for the full fiscal year. So I'm still showing it slow. I'm coming back into the golf course operations. This will definitely be one of my first quarter looks when I come back to you on how they're actually doing with a little bit more data.
Okay, great. And then of course, consider asking the guys at Mesa Verde Partners. They're closer to the ground on their projections. That's number 2. Number 3, on lawyers. Ms. Barlow, are you up there, Kim?
Yes, I am.
So, Councilmember Marr had a very perceptive point about the 1.5 million. It is true that it appears to me like that's more or less of a placeholder. In other words, we had 1.5 million last year, so we're putting it as next year. One thing I think we should consider is actually getting specific budget numbers from the Everett Dory firm and Haynes and Boone, because I don't believe, based on what I know, but I might be wrong, that it's likely that we're going to have a trial in any of those cases in this fiscal year, because of COVID and just because there have been so many summary judgment motions, which is great. And then as cases kind of move through, and both with the summary judgment motion and the appellate level, it seems like we would be able to achieve some economies of scale because the issues are similar in these cases. So we don't have to kind of reinvent the wheel with every appellate brief and so forth. So I would expect those lawyers to be able to sharpen their pencil and bring it in under $1.5 million. Do you agree with that observation?
Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Stevens, members of the council, I have received a preliminary budget for the next fiscal year from Everett Dory. I am reviewing it. It is lower than what was actually spent, or at least so far in this fiscal year. The concern that I have is that the original budget from Everett Dory, and we knew we might have to spend more, but we have spent significantly more than the original budget. So I agree with you that with repetition of issues and motions for summary judgment, that the costs for Everett Dory should definitely be lower in this coming fiscal year, unless we have more cases filed. Knock wood, we don't. But we do have some cases that have different factual issues, which may make that a little more complicated. The newest case, or cases actually, are factually a little bit different than the others. So it's hard to weigh the impacts of those changes. But I do agree with you that there should be a lot of economies of scale for them in this coming fiscal year. At the same time, as more cases move up to the Court of Appeal, and I'm hoping, of course, that at some point we get a written decision in the Yellowstone case that will guide, what happens with the rest of the cases. But until that happens, we're in full briefing and argument mode on all of those cases. So it may be it may be more than we need. I hope that's true. I think we're trying to judge it based on where we are in the litigation, what other litigation might be coming down the pike that we don't know about, as well as looking at the claims that we know may be moving forward to litigation and that we have to adjust for. So.
I think
Thank
Ms.
you.
Burl Harrison wanted to respond as well.
There's another really important consideration as it relates to this pot of funds that is key to the conversation, and that is that we are self-insured for both general liability and workers' compensation. We only have a $2 million placeholder in our reserves related to our self-insurance requirements, and we have them on both sides, on the general liability side and on the workers' compensation side, which means that excess insurance coverage doesn't kick in until and unless we've met that self-insurance retention, which in our case is 1 to 2 million based on whether it's general liability or workers' comp, and that is per case. And so if we had even just 2 cases in a fiscal year that were over $1 million or over $2 million, we would deplete the SIR and we would have no place else to pay for that. And so this funding needs to stay in place, even if there was no additional attorney expenses beyond our Jones and Mayer contract. This is the only other place to turn if we have just 2 cases a year that are above the self-insured retention, which could happen. And so that's the additional safety net that funding provides, in addition to just being for outside counsel. It's also where we would turn if we completed our self-insured retention that's in the reserves, which is just 2 million, which is just 1 case.
That also would cover if we had to settle any cases that related to, there might be some employment case over time or anything like that, right?
Correct.
It's not just the sober living home litigation.
Correct. It's our self-insured retention, it's settlements and outside litigation. So I think that cutting it would not be prudent.
I agree.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Stevens, did you have any other questions?
I'm glad I asked. I have 3 more things, no more questions, 3 more statements. So anyway, I think one of the reasons I appreciate this budget and appreciate the work that everyone's done is I think it reflects what I'll call a back to the basics policy. As we're moving forward now, that I think is going to be in this fiscal year, in probably next fiscal year, we're going to have to get back to the basics. We're going to have to get back to trimming trees as much as we can, fixing streets as much as we can, not as much as we want, as much as we need, as much as we can, providing good, solid public safety services, helping our helping our businesses get back up on their feet. This council, including me, I include myself in this, certainly, especially since 2016, is a very ambitious council. But I think what we have to do is temper that as best we can. I know it's going to be difficult, and turn that into kind of active restraint, to understand that every single thing that a constituent wants is going to cost money. And it's going to be difficult for us to say to them, we can't do this because we have budgetary constraints. But I think that from my perspective, that's what I'll be doing. And it's not going to be easy, but I think that's what we have to commit to as a group. I don't know if this has anything to do with it, if there's any connection, but I will tell you this regarding furloughs. I have a policy by which I live my life. I never ask somebody to do something that I'm not willing to do. So I think that if we're talking about furloughs, we should talk about the city council department. And we don't make much, so we won't lose much. But I think that we should match any furlough dollar for dollar, percentage point for percentage point. And that's certainly going to be part of any motion that I make on the budget when the time comes. Finally, notwithstanding my statement about restraint, I do want the podcast. I think that could really help in terms of connecting with people. The radio show that I do on Sunday is good, but it really doesn't get to a lot of people. And it's not political. It's a way to showcase our community, and it's a way to build our economy and get a lot of good feedback from people. So I'd like to look into that because, you know, I guess that's my version of the low cost park improvements or whatever. I think we can do a podcast, and we should do that in this fiscal year. That's it. That's 6.
Okay, Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you to all my peers who asked all the good questions ahead of me. I only have one left to really ask, and it's about the Parks and Rec Department. I'm just a little confused because I know we mentioned how we're essentially no longer doing any of our summer programs due to the whole COVID-19 crisis. But I'm wondering why most of our maintenance and operation costs are still staying the same. Can anyone just give me a quick update on that or explain that to me?
Who should answer that? Ms. Brill Harrison? Mr. Sethuraman, is that the right person?
I can answer
Okay.
that. This is
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yvette.
Good.
Madam Mayor, members of the council. So with the reopening guidelines, we anticipate just happening a lot quicker than we had initially anticipated. We wanted to be very cognizant of that and build a budget that would still allow us to offer some programming if and when that the restrictions began to lift. And so this budget takes that into account for like late summer, early fall programming. So it's I'll call it a healthy enough budget that it allows us the opportunity to still offer services to our constituents.
Okay, so essentially what we're saying is we are hoping to by fall having our main program back up and running as usual, correct?
To some degree. I mean, there are definitely going to still be some restrictions with the social distancing, but it allows us some element of phased in programming.
Okay, thank you. You know, just to follow Mayor Pro Tem Stevens, I too am missing my fan, but I also thank staff for all the work you've done for us in this past month. I know it's been incredibly difficult for you guys to go through your budgets to figure out what we can wean off to make sure we're doing our best to keep our budget going and functional. And I really want to just thank you guys for all you're doing for us. And I really want to give a shout out to Mr. Robin, because, you know, despite the fact that we are cutting down costs, we're still doing a lot of capital improvements in our city. You know, I really am just happy that we're going to be expanding parks during this tough times in Ketchum Libel Park. And so I just want to thank staff for all their hard work and just thank you, honestly.
Okay, I don't see any other council member hands raised. So I echo the sentiments of everyone about thanking our team. Everyone has, I know, had to basically put 2 budgets together in the same month, which is very difficult. Hard enough to put 1 budget together, let alone start over and start a new one. So thank you, Ms. Molina, for all the late nights and the patience with the terrible technology. So we will get that fixed, hopefully sooner rather than later if I have my way. I have just a few questions that aren't, you know, there's nothing urgent about them. I just, as far as, and this goes to Ms. Aguilar, we have the contract classes in Ms. Molina's presentation. It showed a reduction in the contract classes. And so I didn't understand that because, I mean, it looks like from the governor's orders, we're going to be able to do camps. We're going to be able to do contract classes starting as early as next week. And so I'm trying to understand why the significant reduction in the contract classes.
Sure, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. The total was composed of youth and adult contract classes, as well as defunding the Smart Camp for the summer, which we had spoken with the district about. So there's about a 65,000 reduction of the 103. That include 65 of it is for the smart camp, and then the other portion of it is that usually we start registration well in advance for summer programming. So in order for us to actually have our contract classes, we would have already taken registration. And so even if we begin to implement and allow some of those contract classes, our facilities aren't open. So it's taking that into account. So this really only goes through the middle of August.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, as it relates to the smart camp, so as of Friday, the governor has ordered that schools can come back, camps can come back, family entertainment can come back, family entertainment centers like bowling alleys and boomers. We don't have a boomers, but we have a bowling alley, things like that. So I guess I'm very concerned, and parents are going back to work because all these business sectors are all opening up. So I'm just very concerned that we are eliminating the smart camp. What's in our conversations with the district, what is the reason why we are eliminating the smart camp when it looks like everyone's going to need the smart camp? And the other camps, and the other camps for that matter. I was going to ask about that too. So if you could address the other Camp Costa Mesa as well.
Sure. So initially with the smart camp, we had met with the district, I believe it was in late March, early April, and they expressed just some challenges with staffing and being able to develop the curriculum for that program when there was so much uncertainty around the pandemic and what was happening. So while in theory we would be able to implement it now, that planning and everything that was occurring or should have occurred in order for us to be ready for summer wasn't happening, like I said, just because of everything that was going on during that time. With regard to our camps, that takes a lot of planning on our end for our staff. It includes our part-time staff. And so to realistically bring that kind of level of programming, there's a lot of preparation work that really happens during the spring months. And our staff were all redirected to addressing the pandemic, which we did in the form of social services. To get those programs up and running again is just a challenge. And while the guidelines have been lifted, actually implementing that in-house and from a practical standpoint, there needs to be some more work done on our end in order for us to implement summer camps or other types of programming for the summer.
Okay, so we're not going to have any summer programming for kids in this community this summer. I really need to know, because I think that I don't support that. Ms. Farrell-Hairston?
So I think, to Yvette's point, this budget has been in process now for the last few weeks, right? So I think we were in a different place than where we are now. We did allow for some flexibility, knowing that reopening was happening and that we wanted to be able to project some amount of funds to be able to do some level of programming. By no means is it going to be the same level of programming, because we've let some staff go already at this point, and we still, even though the economy is reopening now, the revenue is not here now. And so I think the struggle is what level of services or programming can we have with the very reduced level of funding that we'll see. And so while the economy is reopened, the revenue is not at that level. And so I think what we have in the budget is assuming that when school's back, we'll be able to have our after-school program back. But for the summer, I think what we're assuming is that we wouldn't be able to bring people back until probably August. And so that's where we are with the revenue that we're anticipating. And so it's a very painful place to be, for sure, because we have a disconnect with the economy being open and parents needing to get back to work, but not having the revenue to be able to provide the same level of service that we had in the past. And again, that programming starts, in the spring.
Right, but we have an opportunity to use the COVID CARES Act funding to pay for childcare, which I've been asking about for the whole entire pandemic. And we're not doing that. Why aren't we doing that? I mean, that's the way to get the funding, is to use the childcare funding, because this is directly related, because the governor is opening up these sectors sooner than expected. They were closed, and that's why we canceled. Now they're opening, and we're going to have to adjust. I just feel like if we're not having one program for kids, we're leaving, 1,200 kids maybe from having some kind of local camp program in the city of Costa Mesa that's at a price point, and in most cases free, or at a price point that people can afford. So the camp Costa Mesa, you have to pay for. So it wouldn't be that much of a loss of revenue. We could backfill whatever the subsidy is with the CARES Act funding. So I just think we should look at that. And I'm just concerned that we're not going to have any activities for our youth, our young kids that are going to be, I don't know, are they going to just stay home by themselves now over the summer? I don't think that's the community that we have been. And I don't think that it should be the community that we are. And we need to prioritize caring for our kids. And so I hope that we can figure out a way to reprioritize getting some programming for kids for the summer, because they're just going to be left at home otherwise, because parents have to go back to work. I mean, it is like destitute for many families. They have to go back to work, and they can't afford to pay for some expensive childcare. Plus, who knows what's open anyway, So I don't know. I'm concerned about that. I'm also, I'm concerned that our budget, the reduction of overtime, I agree with everybody who said this. I don't think that that's a realistic number. I think that we're never going to meet that, and it's kind of artificial because we never meet it. and especially with all the overtime that we're seeing already for this year's budget, we're going to definitely exceed it. And then the helicopter cuts, I don't know. That seems like that might be artificial also, because we can't really predict that. We can't predict if we need the helicopter to come because there's a car chase, or we can't predict if we need the helicopter because there's a missing child, or whatever we use the helicopter for. And I know we use it limitedly at this point, but I'm worried that that's kind of an artificial placeholder that we're not going to be able to meet. And I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Stevens on the golf course revenue. I mean, I think we're going to see an increase in revenue, not a decrease, because of the increase in the fees, as well as it's just the golf course is packed every day. Everybody's golfing because they're not working. And they obviously have money to not have to worry about it. I am concerned about making sure that over the next 6 months, we kind of hamper down our activities so that we can give time to stabilize, to get our city team back to City Hall, and get that new system that is going to be the new way that we do business at City Hall established. And that's going to take a little bit of time. And while people are doing that and getting those systems in place and kind of adjusting to that, that's going to take time away from doing other projects. So I am concerned, and I do think that we should be cognizant of that. I think the reduction in the number of hours that we're talking about, and the unfilling of the vacancies, is going to reduce our ability to serve the community. And so we have to be really disciplined about what we focus on. And I do think it would be helpful. I know we were going to have the priority setting meeting. We didn't get to, but I think it would be helpful if we could do that, because maybe to be able to say, okay, as a council, we all agree over the next 6 months, we're only going to focus on the following. So everybody's on the same page, and city staff have a roadmap so that they aren't getting pulled in 7 different directions and feeling like they're in the middle of, a family squabble. So I feel that that's really important for us, because I think it's, we're going to need the time to get stabilized, and the main priority needs to get our city hall team stabilized and our economy stabilized. And as we do that, we're going to have to support our community that are struggling, because we have a lot of people struggling right now, a lot of people. And I feel like any resources that we have available, whether it's a person as a resource or funding as a resource, should go to make sure that we're caring for the people in our community who have been hammered the hardest from this whole situation. So, and that, I think that that's reflective in kind of what we're working on. But that's where I am. I will, hopefully we'll work through some of these issues that haven't been resolved yet. But I do think it's very important that we cool our jets for a little bit, because everybody is super smart and super assertive and all want to do a lot, myself included. But with fewer resources, both people and funding, it's just gonna be hard, and it's just gonna create frustration. So that's all I have. I think we should open it up for public comment at this point. Councilmember Guinness, did you have something else, or can it wait till after public comment?
Well, it's sort of a follow-on to what you discussed about the camps. And it goes back to my original question, which I hope we will get resolved, because the program 40232, which shows a big increase, 40233, which shows a big increase, 40236, which show increases, all reference summer programs. So we're showing big increases, but there's something wrong here. Anyway,
that's the following summer, because remember, this goes through, they prepare in the spring.
Yeah, but it
for
goes
the
through
summer
June 30th. That's not
right, but they're preparing everything. I don't know. That's be my guess.
Yeah, but anyway, it just seems even more bizarre that there would be that big an increase, since we're not doing half the programming. So if we could clarify that and clear that up.
Yeah, so maybe we have funded it and we can still do it. No, okay, I'm going to open this item up for public comment. It looks like we have a couple people in the queue. Somebody with the initials RAL. You're up. RAL. Are you there? Ms. Green, can you unmute the microphone for RAL?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I've asked them to unmute themselves.
Oh, they have to do it themselves. Okay, sorry.
They can unmute on their own computer.
Okay, we're going to move on. We'll come back to you.
In the meantime, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. And if you're on the telephone, hit *9.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, there you, okay, there he is. Can we have your name?
Yes, ma'am. My name's Ron Lynch. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I have a question. Well, let me ask. It's actually two questions, if you don't mind. I know it's late, but there's 55% of the budget that goes towards the police and fire department. That means nothing in the form of a graph chart. There's nothing empirically there that I can put my arms around. Is that guns? Is that what is that going towards? Is that going towards salaries, pensions? What is that?
Okay, after you speak, after we take all the comments, then we'll go back and we'll try to answer some of these questions.
That's my important question.
Okay.
You have a chief of police, or we have a chief of police, that his name is Mr. Glass, I believe. He makes in salary $453,256.14 in salary. That's $53,256.14 more than the President of the United States. How in God's name do you justify that?
That's not the salary, but we'll answer these questions.
That is the
after.
salary, ma'am. I have it all here for you. If you like, I could break it down for you.
It's okay. I know the numbers.
I have it all here for you.
Do you have one other question, or are you done?
No, I don't. That is the salary, by the way. I do have everything here for you if you like. And that doesn't even include, that does not even include his, the contribution to his health insurance that he gets for free from us. So I'm curious how it is that you voted on that, how you approved that.
Do you have any other questions?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for checking in. We have another speaker. I'm not even sure how to pronounce this name. Last name is spelled W-A-S-F-Y.
So my name is Walid Wasfi. I actually had a couple of other questions, but I will reiterate the question of Mr. Lynch, who just said that if you're, Madam Mayor, if you're saying that's not the salary, would you please afterwards, tell us what the salary is and kind of just expand more on that, because I'm interested as well. And on another note, I fully and wholeheartedly agree with you, Madam Mayor, on the issue of the camps this summer. I think we absolutely need to do something about that. I don't think we can have it where we can't have any camps this summer. That's my other comment. And lastly, on a less serious note, Councilmember Reynolds, I also support the issue you brought up about the Frisbee golf cages in our parks. So yeah, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, our next speaker is, it's listed as Costa Mesa Oz. It's Miss Iwana. Are you there?
Yes, thank you. It's Susan Iwamoto. I just want to thank you all for the hard work in doing a revised budget in COVID. I want to give some kudos to any conversations that look at equitable engagement. I hope that you'll also look at that from an economic development perspective, and remember that your businesses, though we might not be citizens that vote in your community, we are still a part of your community with stakeholders. We create jobs, but people can live and work in their community. I'd like to also think
Okay, you're cutting out. I'm not sure if you're still speaking or not. Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes. Are you there?
Okay. What I wanted to say was I'm glad that
we lost you. Try again. We lost you.
Enforcement into the block grant program, but I hope that they'll also can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Nope.
Sorry about that. The opportunity zone, can you hear me now?
You're cutting in and out. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to, is there a way you could stand somewhere? Wherever it is you stand when you say, can you hear me now? We can hear you.
Oh my gosh. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm literally moving
okay.
to a different room in my house. Thank you for, I know I'm burning my 3 minutes. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. So
okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to tell you that I'm hoping that you include a stakeholder group for the opportunity zone, because if you use code enforcement as a hammer, you're actually undermining an opportunity zone business, a qualified opportunity zone business, from doing the substantial improvement to a property. And if they don't do the capital gains investment, and I'd love to have a seat at that stakeholder meetings if you do create an economic.
Okay, you're cutting out. So here's what I'm gonna suggest. We'd emailed today or yesterday, I can't remember. But if you could connect with Mr. Locke so that we could get our conference call on for tomorrow, because we can't hear anything you're saying right now. So I'm so sorry. Okay, Mr. Steed, you're up.
Thank you so much, everybody. And this is Tim Steed, Assistant General Manager at the Orange County Employees Association. Our union is affiliated with the Costa Mesa City Employees Association. Thank you, Mayor and Honorable Council members. CMCEA represents frontline workers in every department in the city. We have truly appreciated the amazing dialogue with the mayor, the council, and city management during and even before this unprecedented crisis. Since this is such an important item, we felt it's really important to speak publicly. Our association has advocated for a slow, deliberate approach before any decisions that could reduce essential city services during these challenging times are made. Currently, legislation in both houses of Congress are being debated that could provide municipal governments direct relief. A crisis like this is truly unprecedented. The city of Costa Mesa has demonstrated fiscal responsibility in past years in order to cover these unpredictable times, but continue providing services that make Costa Mesa an absolute destination city in California. Keeping people working, providing essential city services is critical in these times. Every single department in the city has answered the call during this pandemic. So let's keep the dialogue going during these rapidly changing times and utilize these next weeks to monitor a very fluid situation and keep essential workers working. Thank you very much, everybody. And thanks everybody for all of your hard work on this. It's truly hats off to you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Steed. Okay, Mr. Perkins, you have the floor if you want to unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. Again, my name is Mark Perkins. Good evening. Tonight I'm speaking solely on behalf of myself, of course. I wanted to share a story of an experience that has made me question, especially in light of the current Black Lives Matter protests, whether it makes sense for police to be involved in as many city responses as they currently are. It was a cold night this last February, and a group of friends and I had just finished eating dinner at a restaurant near my home. As we walked outside, I saw an older man who looked lost, looked like he needed help. I introduced myself and learned that he had just gotten out of a hospital, had nowhere to sleep, and really was looking for help. I shared that our city had just opened a new homeless shelter. I was very proud of that, a place where he could get a bed and a meal, and asked him if he'd like that. He agreed. He was hungry, he was tired, and he was cold. I backed a little bit away and called our non-emergency police line. I explained what was going on, and as I was talking, the man started to get worried. "Are you calling the police?" he asked. I replied that I was calling the non-emergency police number because that was the way to get referrals to the homeless shelter, especially late at night as it was. "I don't want the police," he said, getting anxious. I explained to the dispatcher this gentleman was desperate for a warm bed and meal. He wanted to go to the shelter, but that he didn't want a police response. Was there any way he could get to the shelter without having an officer respond? "No," she said, "we must send an officer." He overheard that response and walked away into the night. As a contrast, in the Eugene-Springfield metro area of Oregon, their emergency response dispatcher work with Cahoots, a nonprofit mental health services group that sends, in lieu of police, a medical professional and a mental health professional to a wide range of calls, including people experiencing housing issues, at what they report as a lower cost per call than a traditional police response. This has made me wonder, why do we need to send an officer with a gun, a sworn officer, to help a person who's homeless, to respond to mental health crises, to respond to a wide range of other issues that other cities have shown that non-police responses are potentially effective for? So with regards to this year's budget, it seems like it might be worthwhile to fund the exploration of and pilot projects for alternatives to policing for some services, especially in light that this may actually save us money. Thank you so very much for all your hard work on this topic. Have a very good night.
Thank you. Next speaker is Flo Martin. Please unmute yourself.
I was with Mark that night, and it was cold and very wet. And I had no idea that the man in question refused Mark's suggestion for going to the homeless shelter. This makes me really sad. My point tonight is that my husband and I are both taxpayers in Costa Mesa, and we're both pedestrians and cyclists. And I see that the budget just for 2021 allots $6 million for vehicular traffic improvements and only $1 million for active transportation infrastructure improvement. I don't like that. I would like to see more money spent on improving sidewalks, such as on Del Mar Avenue, just down the street from where I live. I would like to see less money spent on traffic signal synchronization. That is really silly. And I would like to see more council emphasis and budget emphasis on your goals for active transportation in my city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is identified as call-in user 1. Ms. Green, can you let that speaker know?
Yes, I'd like to comment on the budget. We all know that it's in a precarious position even before COVID-19. And now it's just really imperative that the cuts are made and that spending is priority one issues. No fluffing the budget this year, and it appears, hopefully not, but that next year might even be worse. I'd like to comment on one of the items in the budget, and it was on, I believe, page 78, and it had to do with the public information requests. And it showed that the workload and the dictators regarding that prescribed public information requests were 100% fulfilled and accurate. And I'd like to remind the council that since COVID-19, these requests have not been coming through. I have a request that's been pending since early April, and it has not been. It was in regards to One Metro West, and that project was pushed through without me having any information that I had requested so that I could comment on that and be relatively prepared on that issue. But instead, I didn't have the documents. I still don't have the documents. I'd like to agree with Councilwoman Reynolds that I think that the parks and our recreation are needed for the children. I'd also like to suggest that for 60 some odd years, we had no council aides or chief of staff, and that's almost $250,000 that I'd much rather see headed and directed toward the parks and recreation and the children. And that's all I want to recall. But one of the justices said that COVID-19 doesn't suspend the Bill of Rights. And as we know, the public information process comes under that umbrella. So I hope that this budget can fulfill and we can have other people have the information so they can comment. And my last comment is this: if we can open TJ Maxx and everything else that the governor has now approved, when are we going to be back in council? Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next speaker is phone number ending 869.
I'm going to do it now. Okay. Put your phone up.
Hello, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. First, I'd like to start by saying that I think
perhaps that the closed session meeting should start a little earlier, because it seems every meeting we've been having has started 20 minutes, at least 20 minutes to half hour late, because it goes over from the closed session. So maybe that can be done better so that the meetings start when they're supposed to. And then regarding the budget, I had a comment about that there were budgetary and fiscal issues before COVID. The projection was that the city would be deficit at about $10 million for each year, the next coming years. And it wasn't 10, it was an average of 10, as I remember. So we had problems way before COVID started, and they're being exacerbated by COVID. But it is important to note that there were problems before, and to fix those behaviors that cause those problems. One comment I would have also is about the city abolishing the marijuana sales tax. In the budget, it says that, you know, last fiscal year that netted about 1.1 million, and for next year that'll only be 100,000. And it was a bad time to do that since marijuana sales are doing well. But I also thought it wasn't respectful to the voters, because the voters initially approved 6%. And though I agreed with maybe lowering it for the businesses for a couple of years, completely abolishing it and doing it so for forever, I thought was really not a prudent fiscal decision. And I will agree with the previous speaker regarding the aid expenditures. I think we can definitely spend that money better. Thank you.
Okay, we have no further speakers at this time, so I will close, unless, yeah, that's right, you don't have to ask you that. No further speakers. I will close public comment. I know Ms. Farrell Harrison wanted to make some comments. Since we're not making a motion, we've just been here to give you input. So would you like to make some comments?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council, for all of your comments this evening and questions. I am very thankful that you have taken so much time to look through the budget document and had very specific questions and feedback for us. And so we'll definitely take all of that back into consideration. And so just to quickly remind us of next steps and the work that we'll be doing in the interim. So we will be coming back to you next week for a second public hearing on the budget. At that time, we'll come back with additional information, particularly in the areas that you've raised, but with a special emphasis on our parks and community services numbers and, you know, what the potential possible programs could be there, knowing that revenue is not quite back to where it was, but we did make certain assumptions in the budget and just revisiting those. And then also taking into account some of the information we've heard about, you know, just our documents in terms of our goals and community engagement and things like that. I really appreciate, I think, most of all, the open dialogue that we've had about expectation setting and also our priorities as we go through the next 6 months, because we are still in a pandemic. And so despite the fact that the economy is reopening and that we're all engaging in public spaces again, we do know that coronavirus is still here. There's still a declared federal emergency, state emergency, county emergency, and local emergency. And so as we continue to go through the next few months, even after July 1 and passage of the budget, there is still work that we'll need to be doing as staff to make sure that as we engage into stage 3 further, as we engage into stage 4, if and when that's possible after the advent of a breakthrough in either a vaccine or a treatment, there'll still be pandemic management issues that we'll need to address that will be time consuming. Even getting us back into City Hall has become more of an exercise in real due diligence and science, making sure that we have everything that we need to make sure that the public is safe and that we're safe, far more in terms of protocols, policies, procedures than we could have imagined. And so I think the conversation about realistic expectations as we move forward over the next 6 months is key. We will be managing a pandemic still. We will be managing a financial crisis still because the economy is not going to come back immediately. We'll be managing as we go through some of the civil unrest issues that we've dealt with, some of that and that work around law enforcement and any opportunities there for for either enhancement or improvement, while we're also engaging in just the day-to-day operations of running a city, which under any circumstance is already a pretty significant workload. That all against keeping most, if not all of our positions that are currently vacant, and then also potentially negotiating a furlough with employees that will cut back staff hours. And so we have basic work that's tough to do during normal circumstances, layer on that a pandemic, a financial issue, recently the civil unrest, and then reduced contracts, reduced staffing levels, and not enough capacity to be able to take on a lot by way of new projects. And so I am comforted by the comments from council that there is a realization of that, and that we have a shared understanding that we'll be engaging in a new in the next 6 months. And it'll be different because we'll have less staff than we have now, or at least less staff hours. And we won't have the contracts to be able to take up some of the slack as staff is engaging in different projects. We're not going to have the same level of consulting work, contractors to be able to offload some of that work. And so it'll be difficult, more difficult in the next 6 months, even than it has been now. And so I think the department heads understand that. I'm glad that you understand that. And so as we go through this budget discussion, I think that has to be still front and center. And you'll be hearing that from us. And it's not from lack of interest, because we're passionate about the work that we do, and that's why we're here, but because we'll be entering into a budget that will have $10 million taken out of it, and potentially cuts in, if we negotiate furloughs and we're successful in that, in terms of time, how much time they're here. And if we can negotiate the furloughs, there'll be a second round of cuts. And so I think these are good conversations for us to be having in terms of what we can expect going forward. I'm glad that we were able to get all the feedback that we received this evening. And so we look forward to bringing that back to you next week. We'll have more details on the shelter, Parks and Community Services, some of the other areas that you've mentioned. But I think the conversation about expectations and priorities over the next 6 months, and as we go through the remainder of this fiscal year, entering into next year, will be key, because it will be an even more constrained framework than what we're dealing with today. And so we've only cut 10 million out of the budget this year. We'll be cutting, basically next year's budget has another $10 million in cuts, and potentially up to 13 million in terms of either salary reductions for employees, which correlate to time, or just another round of cuts. And so just wanted to remind you all of that. But thank you for all of your work tonight. I know this was a long meeting, but we're really thankful for the feedback. I wanted to thank Carol as well again for being relatively new to the city, but really taking this bull by grabbing it by the horns and coming forward with some recommendations. And of course, all of our incredible department heads. And it has been very time consuming to put together a budget, have to shelve it, and then come back with alternative recommendations. So thanks to all the department heads and to Susan Price and helping me lead those discussions. So great work all the way around, and thankful that we could have an honest and open dialogue about where we are and where we're headed into the future. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And if you could, if Ms. Green could provide the information to the speakers who asked some specific questions, if she could provide that, that would be helpful. Okay, so I don't see any other comments. Oh, Mayor Pro Tem, did you want to make a comment? I was going to close the meeting.
Yeah, I don't want to swing at a pitch in the dirt here, but there was a comment made about Chief Glass, and
I said if she could provide the information.
Yeah, and it was $214,000 is his salary. There's a website that's out there in the world, and I'm getting a lot of feedback. Maybe some of you are, and I got an email today that said that our police officers get paid $400,000 a year. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And as to the comparison with the president, there's an old story about Babe Ruth, and Babe Ruth was negotiating his contract when he was with the Yankees, and somebody said to him, how can you ask for that much? That's more than Herbert Hoover makes. And he said, what does Hoover have to do with it? And anyway, I had a better year than Hoover. So I just want to say, Chief Glass, you've had a really good year and you deserve everything you get.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that. All right, thank you so much. Good night, everybody.